Walla Valley with us. We have Dr. Winston Craig. He has his PhD in organic chemistry. That was probably all of your favorite subject in college, right? So we're pleased that Dr. Craig is good at that field because most of us aren't. He is also he has his master's in public health from Loma Linda University, and he is a registered dietitian. He has taught nutrition classes for decades at Andrews University. He has written his own textbook and several other books, which are available at the Adventist Book Center in College Place. And he is going to speak to us today on herbs and spice and everything nice. So we're looking forward to this talk, and we are pleased to have Dr. Craig with us. Let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunities that you give us. Thank you for the Sabbath day. Thank you for the plants that you have allowed us to grow that have so many natural chemicals and nutrients in them. And thank you for experts to help us to understand how to better use them. So I pray that you would guide our time today, that you would be with Dr. Craig and help him as he presents, and help us to ask good questions, Father, and help us also to share this information with our neighbors and our friends. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Dr. Craig, we're looking forward to what you have to say.
Good afternoon. Good to see you again after last night. And we hope your dinner table was full of all the things we talked about last night. You hear me okay? Yes. Okay, I'm going to be controlling both my computer here as well as moving the screen at the back so you can follow along. I'm just having sometimes a little trouble reading the words, so anyway, as you can see from this slide, people are very much interested in what we might call the natural lifestyle, and herbs are considered part of that natural style because they're plants, and plants are good, and they grow all around us. And the other thing is that a lot of pharmaceuticals, as you know, have side effects, and usually the side effects hopefully are kept to a minimal while the benefits can be enacted. And when it comes to herbs, because the plants have more dilute substances, or the concentration of the active materials are in lesser quantity, they tend to have milder, slower effects and fewer side effects. One of the other reasons why people often turn to herbal remedies is because of cost. You know, you go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, your cholesterol's up, your blood sugar's up a little bit, you're perfectly normal. And you know very well you're not, you don't feel good. And so people start applying things that they've heard from their neighbour or they've read on the web. And the attraction going this pathway, as you can see from these three examples of cholesterol reduction and sleeping aids and prostate medication, when you compare the herb price compared to the natural pharmaceutical, the herbal treatment tends to be less than a half, sometimes 1/4 as much. Okay, so let's take a look at the definition of separation between herbs and spices, because people sometimes get these mixed up, and we're going to talk a little bit about what Ellen White says. And we need to understand, when she says spice, what does she mean? Because there's a lot of controversy in that area. So the way that we really look at it today is that the herb is the leaf part of the plant, the fresh or dried leaves such as basil or sage, and generally these are aromatic. You crush them and they smell really nice. That's because they contain what chemists call terpenoids, and that's the same sort of compound when you take an orange peel and you squish it, you squeeze it, and it gets this vapor that comes out. Well, there's limonene in that, and that's a terpenoid. It's sweet, it smells nice, and so these are useful for flavouring, as long as you don't put them in too early in the cooking. Otherwise, these terpenoids get boiled out. It's like gasoline. You know, gasoline is very volatile, so you don't want to apply heat. So these things are best served when the food is finished cooking or near to finished cooking. Spices, on the other hand, are parts of plants other than the leaves. So here we describe the bark, and we give examples for each of them. You can follow along on the screen. Cinnamon, buds, the cloves, the flowers, the saffron, the fruit, anise, seeds, cumin, the rhizomes like ginger, the root bulb, garlic. Okay, these are all what we call spices because it's not the leaf. So this is generally how food industry uses today. If you look on the label and it says spices, it's one of these. It's generally shouldn't be something like basil or sage or rosemary, which are leaves. So this is just a summary for you, not all exclusive. Has some examples there just to give you a feel. Some less common ones like cardamom are popular in other parts of the world. Now, biologists like to use electron microscopes, and I like to look at these because they're beautiful. When I was a kid growing up in Australia, we had to do some carpentry in high school, and I made my mother a bookshelf, and I made a lamp stand, and we had to make the stand and nice. Mum thought it was very nice and sweet. I told her to keep sitting in the couch because I didn't want her to take a close look, because the closer you look, the more likely you'll see the flaws. Okay, I didn't want her to see that and be disappointed. On the other hand, when you look at God's carpentry, it's magnificent. The closer you look, the more magnificent it is. It's not like my work. The closer you look, the more terrible it looks, with all the flaws in the making. With God's work, it's amazing. This is the rhizome of ginger, and it shows you the oil globule there, okay, within the secretory cell. So when you cut ginger and this leaks out, this is what you can smell. You look at peppermint underneath the leaf, and you see again these secretory glands. And when you cut them with a knife, the leaf, or crush it, this gland is busted and it releases these volatile compounds, and you smell how nice it is. And the same with sage, okay? It almost looks like from an E.T. movie or something. It looks, to me, magnificent, very creative. And anyway, this is just an electron microscope. Look at what we're talking about. Just a little bit of fun on the side. Okay, so looking at ancient Bible times, we read in Scripture about how the Israelis longed for the garlic and onions and leeks that they had back in the country of Egypt, where there was irrigation, and they grow well there. And then we think of Passover time, and they celebrated this every year in the spring, and it was a time when they reflected on the bitterness of slavery, working around the clock like machines, very degrading. And so their Passover meal, they used bitter herbs, and these are the examples that they used. Okay, and then hyssop was commonly grown in Israel, fairly wild, as mentioned here, in stony ground and terrace walls, and mixed with salt. It's used as a condiment and eaten with bread and olive oil. It's quite tasty. We often remember hyssop as being a paintbrush to paint the blood on the lentil. Okay, these are some other plants that grow wild in the land of Palestine. So these are herbs of the Bible: dill and mint and cumin. Okay, and we probably think of these because it reminds us of the words of Jesus in Matthew 23, where he pronounced a woe on the leaders. Hypocrites, you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin and have neglected 3 other things which are far more important than paying tithe on these: justice and mercy and faith. Interestingly, you know, the people of Israel, the leadership, had very strict rules about everything, including tithing, and it was generally believed that tithing was not necessary on the herbs that grew at what we would call the back door, next to the kitchen. Those that were used for culinary purposes on a daily use, you didn't have to pay tithe on those. And yet Jesus is saying they are so particular about the law that they went even over that law and even went further than that, and they even paid tithe on that. They're so meticulous about that, but they were blind to the far more important things which he outlined. Wild coriander is an annual appearing with winter crops in Israel. It's widely cultivated as a condiment, while its aromatic leaves were used to flavour food. So this is just a background to give you an idea of the sort of plants that were wild or cultivated and used for purposes in Israel. So let's dial down to the 19th century, to the time of Ellen White, and let's take a quick look at some of the statements that she makes to see how we can interpret them. Ministry of Healing says condiments are injurious in their nature. That sounds bad, right? Food should be prepared simply, free of condiments and spices. And the pictures I've put up there are some of the condiments that are available today. I don't really know what they were specifically, but we do have some hints. We'll get to that. Okay, some phrases that I have selected without the references, just went through her writings and picked phrases that she said and summarized them. There's 7 or 8 of them here, and we'll just read them. Things that she said about spices. And in her writing, she mentions that spices 60 times, 60. Okay, so some of the things are repeated. Number 1, they irritate and inflame the lining of the stomach. That sounds like acid or something corrosive. They act like a fiery whip. Number 2, they make the blood... I'm sorry, I forget, thank you. Number 2, they make the blood feverish and impure and destroy health. Number 3, they create an appetite for something stronger and more stimulating. Dr. Register, my major professor at Loma Linda, he did an experiment once with mice and found that when they were given spicy food and they were given 2 containers, one with dilute alcohol and one with water, do you know which one they chose? The alcohol, which wasn't their choice when they had regular food, but when it had the spices. So that's just one experiment, and it's with rats, but it's interesting. Okay, number 4, excite the animal propensities and enslaves to base passion. That's pretty strong language, that spices make us captive to the lower nature. So keep that in mind. Number 5, weakens moral intellectual powers. Again, pretty strong statement. So we clearly want to know, what are these spices that do such potent things? Number 6, they produce nervousness and irritability of temper. And number 7, the appetite's perverted, and there's no relish for wholesome, nutritious food. And of course, I've made that observation with young people. If they're eating pickles and salsa, hot salsa and all these other things, they lose their relish for simple tomato and avocado and, simple plain food. Just an observation I've made. Okay, so again, I went through her writings, and the ones on the left are referencing what she actually names. Okay, the ones on the right, there's no mention of them, so I'm not making any judgment from her works on these because she doesn't mention them. So cardamom or dill or basil or rosemary, no comment. So you can conclude from that whatever you like, whether they weren't commonly used or whether she had no comment. But the thing that we are of interest is the ones on the left. And the ones that are highlighted in yellow with an X next to it represents the ones that have negative comments. In other words, it seems pretty clear that she's saying these are the ones you leave alone. So black pepper and pepper, which could be cayenne pepper, chili pepper, red pepper, hot pepper, those are all called pepper. Mustard, and then the generic word spices. And as you can see, the individual ones are only mentioned half a dozen times, whereas she uses this big all-inclusive word spices many, many times. She also mentions ginger, but it's positive, and cinnamon and cloves, which are mentioned, but you can interpret it one way or the other. The cinnamon, for me, is mentioned in the context of these cinnamon sweet rolls that were sold at camp meeting, and they were fed to kids. And she says we shouldn't do that because they're losing their appetite for good, wholesome food. So she's not really saying that cinnamon's bad, she's just saying that cinnamon rolls, which are being given to kids at camp meeting, is not the appropriate thing to be doing. Okay? So you can read it however way you want to, but for me it's like it's not a negative sort of comment. Okay, we're having a jam here. Okay, so another interesting point to make is, how does she associate this word spices in her writings? It's interesting, it's juxtaposition with some pretty horrible things, you might say, or pretty things that she talks about very strongly. I shouldn't say horrible things because people are eating these all the time, but things like mince pies and sausage and rich cakes and pastries and grease, tea and coffee and rich gravies. Along with those things that are listed, she also lists mustard, pepper, pickles and condiments. So I don't know that we can put them in the same strength, integrity of negative effect, but they certainly are not in good company. Okay, does that seem clear? That they are listed in poor company, and children were especially warned not to eat these things. Okay, so the next step, we looked at the Bible, we looked at Ellen White. Now I'm going to look at the cultural context. Our pastor mentioned this morning, or was it the Sabbath school teacher, I forget, that it's important that we look at Scripture and the spirit of prophecy in the cultural context. And so we want to ask ourselves, health reformers of her day, what were they saying about spices and condiments, and what were they referring to? Does that make sense? You know, she is the product of her culture, and a lot of things she said is through the eyes of a 19th century American. Let's face it. Okay, so a couple of years I was teaching at University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and Amherst College is a famous Ivy League school, and it was right in the center of health reform. Just down the road at Northampton was Sylvester Graham, who we know very well was a contemporary of Ellen White, and all his works are in the local library in Northampton. And while I was there, I had a privilege to go over to these libraries and snoop through some of these 19th century documents of some of these health reformers. Dr. Hitchcock mentioned 5 types of condiments. This might shock you. Fats, sweets, acids like vinegar, salt and spices. Dr. Troll, who was prominent working with, at the time of Adventist health reform, Alan James White, he condemned dishes highly seasoned with pepper, cayenne, salt, vinegar and mustard. Okay, so you see these words popping up that she used as being negative. Vinegar, pepper, mustard, okay, spices. So this gives us a clue. Americans developed a great taste for condiments, spices and sauces that heightened and sometimes transformed the flavors of foods and stimulated the appetite to an unnatural degree. Common offenders, and I'm taking this from Catherine Beecher, who was considered to be the mother of home economics, which was the forerunner to nutrition programs. It was home economics, where men and women, mostly women, learnt the chores of cooking and home preparation. So she wrote this book that's listed there for you on page 97. I'm directing from there. Common offenders included mustard, the hot red peppers native to the US, as well as imported black pepper. So again, this is the middle of the 19th century. This is the time when Ellen White's health message was coming and she was writing. So this was the atmosphere surrounding that time. Condiments were considered by the 19th century health reformers to stimulate the nervous system to the point of exhaustion. Bad news. Overstimulation is not good. So anything that was considered in that category, health reformers said, leave alone. Catherine Beecher wrote in the mid-19th century, quoting, that was from the earlier reference I gave you, condiments stimulate the appetite to an unnatural degree. Pepper, mustard and spices are those commonly used. Okay, there they are again, the ones that Ellen White actually names. These articles are inflammatory in their nature and stimulating to the nervous system. Very similar language that she uses. So she's consistent with the health reformers of the 19th century in terms of their belief that these hot, stimulating foods were not good for our system, that they were overstimulating of the nervous system. So what spices then are we talking about? Just summarizing: red chili pepper, black pepper, mustard, pickles, and these condiments which appear to be concentrated hot sauces that were used to pour over salads and other dishes to give them flavor enhancement, just like we use salt today. This is a statement that I like to quote from Ministry of Healing that helps put all this into perspective. And notice when it was written, 1905, and we're 18 years past that. And she describes in this fast age I have to chuckle when I read that. In this fast age, it's like, so what do we call today's age? Lightning speed or what? The less exciting the food, the better. Condiments are injurious in their nature, and then she rattles the same ones off again. And other things of like character irritate the stomach, and so forth. So her comment is, I think, relevant, and I think it applies also to what we mentioned this morning about high-energy caffeine beverages. These highly stimulating things are overstimulating our generation, and particularly with respect to the high-energy caffeinated beverages, the teenagers, the adolescents, who are being so stimulating that they're getting all of these bizarre neurological effects, cardiovascular symptoms, etc. It may not go to that same degree with the spices, but certainly excessive use of them could have things that are listed in her writings. Okay, now with that background, let me turn to some of the scientific literature and let me share with you a handful of spices, and then we'll look at some herbs that there's been research done on. Cayenne pepper, chili pepper, hot red pepper contains large amounts of capsaicin and other capsaicinoids, which are in significant levels, and these things irritate the mucous membranes and cause a burning sensation. Now, it's very obvious by looking around at my family and friends that people's gut, people's mucosa has different levels of tolerance. Some of us, the mere speck of red pepper in the food, and we have problems for a day or two. Others seem to take fiery hot pepper with immunity, it seems. So I get the message that everybody's physiology is different, so different people are going to respond. And the important thing as nutritionists and physiologists that we have to recognize is that each one of us must read our own body. We must be in tune with our own physiology, not the doctor, not the health practitioner, but ourselves, because we know what we can eat and get away with and what we can't eat, because if we eat it, we'll be in pain or suffer or whatever. Okay? So the research shows that consumption of a lot of red pepper can do bad news on ulcers. And the study that's referenced here, this is now 20 years ago, an increased risk of stomach cancer was observed with an increased risk of... Did we advance that? No, sorry. An increased risk of stomach cancer was observed with an increased level of chili pepper. Consumers of chili peppers had 5.5 times greater risk of stomach cancer, and for the very highest consumers, it was up to 17 times greater. Now, you can argue all you like, but to me it says an overuse of chili pepper doesn't seem to be good or safe, okay? And these studies mostly come out of Mexico and India, which we know use substantial amounts. Chili pepper, are we going backwards? No, I'm sorry, I'm getting myself mixed up here. Black pepper, on the other hand, comes from the berry of tropical vine, Piper nigrum. The black peppercorns are the unripe berries that turn black when they're dried, and these are quite pungent. The white ones are ripened berries, as opposed to the black being unripe, and their taste is less aromatic. So clearly the black ones are favoured because of the greater pungency. Now, there's conflicting evidence about black pepper. There's some studies in the literature that shows bladder cancer can be a problem, but not other cancers. On the other hand, there are some studies that show that GST, which is glutathione transferase, is an important enzyme that's involved with regulating cancer. It's involved, and actually the story in simple language is that there is some protection against cancer. So some studies show it's pro and some show it's con. Okay, so probably the truth lies somewhere in the middle of the amount that's used. With red pepper, it's the same way. A small amount of chili pepper has protective properties from the phytochemicals that give it that red coloration, but these other compounds, the capsaicin, when taken in large amounts, can be dangerous. Did I miss one out? I think I did. Black pepper is a vital ingredient of different medicinal formulations in the Indian system of medicine, particularly Ayurveda, which is the main system there. Indians consider black pepper as the king of the spices, and it contains the compound that we know very well. It's very well documented. You see the chemical structure there at the bottom, piperine. Okay, and piperine has been shown to be anti-inflammatory. Does that ring a bell from last night? So we know that this is a positive compound, and it's anti-cancer. A new report, and that's quoted there at the bottom in toxicology research, quote, black pepper is a potent nutraceutical for preventing the progression of chronic myeloid leukemia. So it's anti-cancer when applied medicinally, when applied by a healthcare professional. It can promote apoptosis, which is the programmed death of cancer cells. So you can see black pepper has some benefits, but again, too much, it may be not good. Okay, so now we flip down to summarizing a few more of these, and I've summarized them nicely for you here under the culinary herbs and spices. So some of these, I'm not sure there's any herbs here. They look like all spices. Oh, sage is a herb. So we're looking at under three categories that we spoke about last night: cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. And interesting, these spices help us in all categories because they have anti-inflammatory properties. They have phytochemicals, antioxidants that protect us. So I'm not going to read them all. You can see the names there. The cancer chemopreventive activity. We've listed 5 or 6 of them that have been researched and have been shown to have protection against cancer. Management of cardiovascular problems, that may be lowering your LDL cholesterol, it may be inhibiting blood clots, it may be blocking LDL cholesterol from oxidation, which we know is the primary thing that is related to atherosclerosis. Could do any one of those things. We've listed some there, and then there's some that improve glycemic control. So let's take a look, a little more detail, just quickly, because our time's ticking away. We've listed here 5 that are useful for lowering cholesterol: garlic, psyllium, fenugreek, flaxseed, and turmeric. There's research on all of these. The compound in the bracket is the known active component that achieves that lowering of cholesterol. And so what I'm presenting to you is evidence-based science. It's not Grandpa's mythological book that he's dreamed about. This is documented science that helps us to track things. Now, garlic, of course, is one of the most popular. It has anti-thrombotic effect. It lowers your blood lipids, your triglycerides, and it may even lower high blood pressure. So some call it the magic bullet, but it doesn't do everything, and you can get too much of it, so use it discretionary. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that garlic needs some quiet time. This is what I mean. When you immediately throw garlic into a soup or a stir fry, you don't get the full benefit. You crush it or you cut it, and then you let it sit for a minute, because that crushing or cutting activates an enzyme, allanase, which converts the compound that's there into an active material that generates this, I don't want to call it witch's brew, but angelic brew of wonderful chemicals that lower blood cholesterol and blood clots and cancer risk and so forth. So the benefit you get from the garlic doesn't kick in until the enzyme does its work after you've cut it or crushed it, okay? So remember to do that. So 60 seconds of microwave heating or 45 minutes of oven heating inhibits garlic's ability to be a cancer protective compound because it inactivates allanase. So when you chop or cut and let it stand for 10 minutes, then it generates the active compounds that you want it to do. Okay, then there's curcumin, which is the active component from turmeric, that lovely yellow powder that you can use to make your tofu look like scrambled egg or put in rice or whatever. And turmeric 5 years ago was probably America's best kept secret. I think everybody knows about it today. You can see it on the shelf in a little bottle in Safeways or anywhere else. And it also impacts on blood lipids and blood clotting. So it's a good protective against heart disease. Okay, and then inhibition of blood clots. Again, garlic's on the list along with onions, ginger, and ginseng. And some of the compounds that are known to have this antiplatelet or anti-clotting effect are listed there on the pictures. Okay, now moving to cancer protective. This is where it gets really fun. So you have the garlic family, onions, chives, and leeks. They all have an effect, but it's not the same potency. It goes down the scale. Garlic, strongest, onion the next, and down the list. They have different compounds with different potency. Ginger and turmeric also anti-cancer. And then we have two families of herbs, the Lamiaceae and the Apiaceae. The first one is the basil family, the oregano, sage, rosemary, and thyme. These all have terpenoids, which are not only nice to smell when you crush them, but they protect us against cancer. And then we have the Apiaceae that we mentioned last night, the carrot family, and we've listed those for you there. So here are the pictures, just in case you don't know what they look like. And we can grow these in a garden, and I tell people that my wife has 10 green fingers. Mine are all black, but I can grow herbs, so that's how easy it is. Okay, if a fellow with black thumbs that can't grow nothing can grow herbs, it's really easy. So I encourage you to plant these in the garden, and some of these, like thyme and rosemary, survive the winter. Basil won't, but some of the others will. And this is the other family, the Apiaceae, and cilantro, of course, is the center of every Puerto Rican dish, and others, cumin's great, added to soups and stews, and parsley, very wonderful additions. Okay, so last night we talked a lot about phytochemicals, pigments, antioxidants, color compounds, and we use the word phytochemical to sort of cover this whole bunch of good guys. Well, it shouldn't be any surprise to you that the things that are in the fruits and vegetables and grains and legumes, where else will they be that are also plant foods? Herbs and spices are going to have the same families of compounds. So it's no shock when you start analysing what is it about these things that convey all these chronic disease preventing features. It's the phytochemicals that we found in the foods that we talked about last night. Now, some of you know Medline is where you go to check out research papers, And this is old, I have to admit. I did this analysis, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, so the numbers are probably a lot bigger, but it gives you a feel. These are typing in these names of spices and herbs with the word cancer and seeing how many hits you get, how many research papers, how many peer-reviewed papers actually exist to analyze these things that we eat. You might be shocked to see onions and turmeric and garlic, pretty much 100 or more research papers. So what I'm saying is, what I'm presenting is not some wishful thinking. This is based on good, strong science, and we should get comfort when people in different parts of the world, in different labs, come up with the same results. That's comforting. If you make a recipe and someone else wants to copy it and it doesn't work, they think you're, but if they can reproduce it, there's something good about your recipe. So consistency is very important. So in studies we see that regular use of garlic can decrease stomach cancer up to 60%. Colorectal cancer even up to 80%. Now the range is big because human beings, we're all different. Asians, Africans, Latin Americans, we're all different. And we have different dietary, other components, and things grow differently. But the interesting thing is these advantages are for high levels versus low levels. And as stated here in this paper, whether it's raw or cooked, doesn't make any difference. The value is still there. And the cohort studies confirm an inverse relationship. The more garlic, the better the protection. Again, as we said last night, that's good. When you can show that there's a dose response, that means you're on the right track. These are some of the compounds in garlic. They're all sulfur-containing. Great interest to me, but for you, they're protective against cancer. That's the main thing. Garlic also enhances the immune function. It stimulates lymphocytes, natural killer cells, etc. Therefore, it has this anti-inflammatory action, and it's no surprise because of that it's useful against chronic diseases, but it's also used for antibacterial activity and antiviral properties, so people use it for fighting flus and so forth. Now, looking at onions, I like this picture because on the left are all the strong onions, and on the right are the weak, wishy-washy, walla walla, Vidalia onions, the ones that don't have much kick. They're famous. You go to other parts of you're from Walla Walla, next time bring me some onions. So, people like these. But when you look at flavonoids, which are the antioxidants, the active compounds, what do you notice? The hot, strong ones are loaded. The soft ones they have some, but not so much. So when you look at the human cancer cell data, you'll notice the Vidalia onions, this is the line up here. So inhibition of colon cancer, they all inhibit colon cancer, but which ones do it the strongest and quickest? It's these ones down here, shallots and the hot red onions, okay? The softer ones are not so effective. So my message is, don't try to avoid a bit of fling, a bit of bite, a bit of heat from the onions, because that's associated with property, just like the brassica family we mentioned, the isothiocyanates in your broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and arugula. The stronger the bitterness, the more the protective phytochemicals that are there. This Dutch study showed that 50% less stomach cancer eating half an onion a day. Now, I'm not recommending you all do that, but this just shows you the value that onions can have. And there are many properties for cancer prevention. We won't go over these biochemical properties, but the flavonoid quercetin is very rich in onions, as opposed to garlic, which are mostly sulfur compounds. And as we showed earlier, turmeric contains curcumin, which is again a polyphenolic that protects against many different types of cancers. I have to take just 1 minute to tell you the story, because my father-in-law, he grew up in a family where he liked his egg, and scrambled egg was a favourite. When he came to visit us in Michigan at Andrews, my wife prepared this lovely dish here, which we served to him. Oh, he relished eating that. After it was all over, he noticed there was a grin on my face, and he said he kind of smelled a rat. And he said, "What was that? Was that really egg I ate?" And we said, "Yeah, it was egg, plant-based egg, scrambled tofu with turmeric." Oh. And we have many other experiences with other cases where people are given tofu in a form that they don't identify with, and they say it's great. But if you meet them on the street and ask them what they think of tofu, so, you can prepare foods which, with a bit of seasoning, can be very palatable, and people can think they're eating something else, and it can be quite healthful. Anyway, sorry for the personal story, but I find it funny. Play a trick on your father-in-law. It doesn't happen very often. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go through this list, but there are many different pathways that curcumin block or hit or shut down, which make it useful for cancer prevention. So it's not just like one pathway fixes all. No, it has multiple ways of acting. And that's often the case with many of the phytochemicals. With cancer, they have multi-pathways that they attack. And similarly with ginger. The compound there is gingerol. Again, it's a multiple hydroxy compound that inhibits tumours. Okay, just a word about diabetes. There are 4 that stand out that are protective. So for people who are struggling with managing their blood sugar, these are things that can be used. Fenugreek, of course, is more commonly used in the subcontinent, like India. Bitter melon drinks are made from Chinese and West Indian, very commonly use these. The fruits of prickly pear, this is the next one, nopal. This is Mexican and Latin American. I remember when I was in Peru, they invited me after class to come out and see our tuna farm. I thought, oh, that'll be interesting, seeing a fish farm out here in the middle of the college grounds. So I went out, and here's all this prickly pear, and I said, "So where's the fish?" I quickly learnt that the tuna is what they call the fruit on the prickly pear. So anyway, cinnamon is also well researched, and it comes largely from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and places over there. And there are some studies that we'll just quickly refer to. This is blood lipids. Cinnamon given 1 gram, 3 grams, or 6 grams, and you'll notice at the bottom I say that 1 teaspoon is 2.6 grams. So 1 gram is about 1/3 of a teaspoon, 3 grams is almost a teaspoon, and 6 is 2 teaspoons. And you'll notice that after 40 days here, the numbers have dropped. Is this not working? Oh yeah, the numbers have dropped, and here's the percentage change. So around about 20 to 30% decrease in blood glucose, not cholesterol, blood glucose levels after about 6 weeks. Whereas the placebo, which is the dummy, there was no significant changes. And similarly with cholesterol, the blood lipids, around 12 to 25% reduction. So cinnamon improves the insulin receptor function, increases insulin sensitivity, so it helps control blood glucose because it helps insulin be more effective in its work. And this is a study done with rice pudding, adding cinnamon to it, and you'll see when you add 6 grams of cinnamon into 300 grams of pudding, the blood glucose curve after you've eaten the starchy rice is much lower. These numbers here are about 50% lower than when the cinnamon's not there. So it seems that human studies reveal cinnamon flattens the blood glucose, lowers your immediate insulin need. People who are wanting to control their blood glucose better, who are pre-diabetic, maybe this is the way to go. And then there are a number of common herbs that are useful not only for cooking, but they also have properties that can be used in the home. Coriander can be used for stomach disorders. Cumin is an appetite stimulant. It also lowers your blood glucose, and it's active against H. pylori, which is, for some, a common stomach complaint, contamination and the cause of stomach ulcers. Parsley is a mild diuretic. Sage and thyme both are good for mouthwashes and throat infections, etc. Okay, so we come to the question of, okay, you've talked about all these products. Where can we buy them if we want to? How do we get them? What is the safe source? And I've got here half a dozen principles that are useful. Number one, always use labeled bottles or packages from well-known companies like Celestial or Nature Made or so forth. Don't buy them bulk, because the shop hand puts them out in the bin with a label, but I'm not always sure they know what they're labeling. And it's far better to do it where there's quality control at the factory. Don't exceed the recommended doses, because what's listed on the package is generally the highest dose. So don't go over that. Standardized activity is important. What do I mean by that? Well, a good company will tell you what the active principle is and how much they guarantee is in there. Like with garlic, it'll tell you this has 4 milligrams of allicin per tablet. Do you trust them? Well, if it's not true, they're going to get caught sooner or later. So generally, that tells you they have a lab testing set up where they're screening routinely and making sure that they can guarantee that it has approximately that amount. St. John's wort that's used for depression, okay, it should also tell you about the active compound, hypericin. So whenever you're going to buy anything, look to see whether it's been standardized, whether it has this active component with a milligram quantity that they guarantee. If it's not working, change the brand, because sometimes companies don't do things right. Some trials with garlic have shown that it doesn't lower cholesterol, and in going back and testing, they found that these tablets didn't have the active allicin compound in them. So if you think something should work and it's not, change the brand. And then what are the best brands? We've listed 3 here for you. Nature Made, Nature's Bounty, Nature's Way. These are some that are highly recommended by pharmacists. So patients and physicians often lack accurate knowledge about the safety of herbs and their efficacy, and that's probably not good, that they don't have that accurate information. Why is it important? Well, you'll see. Patients often don't give the information about what they're doing. You know, you go to the doctor and they ask you, are you taking vitamin B12? Are you taking this and that? And you have to check down the list. People often don't volunteer these herbal supplements that they're taking because they don't think it's important, and it really is, or they think that the health practitioner doesn't care or doesn't know anything about them, or even worse, that they will not support what they're doing and they'll undercut. There are some people who won't share with their doctor because they think the doctor will, ha ha ha, you know what I mean, will think this is hocus pocus, okay? This is real. Surveys have been done and people confess these reasons why they don't tell their doctor what they're doing. Why is it important? For this very reason. There are interactions between regular drugs, medication for blood pressure, for blood lipid lowering, for allergy, whatever it is. Maybe not all of them, but for some of them there are interactions. There are some which enhance and some that block. And if the doctor doesn't know what other things you're taking, he can't figure out why this is not working or why you're getting this huge response. Okay, and we've given a couple of examples down at the bottom. I don't know if you can read them, but garlic may increase the bleeding time of someone taking warfarin. And today, almost invariably, the doctor who's going to do surgery on you, the nurse or the med tech will always ask you, are you taking garlic? Because they've had problems with this before. Valerian, which is often used for getting to sleep, very commonly used. And it potentiates the sedative effect of barbiturates. So anybody who's taking sleeping pills and valerian, the valerian will cause the barbiturates to act in a much stronger fashion than predicted. So these are reasons why doctors or healthcare practitioners should know what you're taking, how often and how much. So in the remaining 5 minutes or so, I'm just going to quickly go through some herbal products, because we've dealt mainly with spices, just to show you what are some of the things that are commonly available on the market and for which I've checked out. I don't have the references here because we've listed many products and there'll be many different references. But diuretics are commonly used to help with blood flow. They're often used by women at a certain time of the month when they experience water retention, whatever. Goldenrod, juniper berries, parsley, uva ursi, and stinging nettle leaves all have been shown to have mild diuretic activity. And commonly when you buy a bottle of herbal diuretic, you'll get a mixture of 2 or 3 or 4 of these. So read the labels, that's important. Read the labels not just for the active constituent, but what are the herbs that are there, and hopefully where they were grown is important too. Then there are some digestive aids. Ginger is known to be an antiemetic. I remember when we were up in Alaska, we went on a boat cruise out on the bay there, and the captain offered us all ginger cookies. And I thought, well, he's just being nice offering cookies, but I said, no, these are ginger cookies. So being a curious person, I went up to him, I said, these are ginger. Are you aware that ginger is for motion sickness? He said, that's why I offered them. I said, ah. So even the sea captain knows about some basic herbal medicine. Peppermint was discovered by the British as useful for treatment of irritable bowel syndrome. The Europeans are very big using chamomile for GI complaints, licorice for ulcers, and slippery elm, very rich in fibre mucilage which coats an irritated gut. My dad used to, whenever he had a irritable bowel, he would mix up some slippery elm and drink it, and he was happy ever after till the next bout. Okay, and then headache relief. Feverfew is the most commonly used for decreasing the severity and frequency of migraines. Peppermint oil rubbed on the forehead also relieves headaches. Some people have tried eucalyptus oil. It might be useful for candida and athlete's foot, but for headaches, it's unique to peppermint oil, not eucalyptus oil. Okay, mild tranquilizers or gentle sedation. Valerian, we mentioned, is commonly used for people to get to sleep. Hops, passion flower and lemon balm. Again, these are commonly mixed. 3 or 4 of them are mixed together to give added potency, because these are all mild compared to Xanax or some other sleeping thing. These are very soft, mild things. So mixing them gives a little extra added strength. And of course, most of them have 0, not totally, but close to 0 side effects, whereas the other pharmaceuticals, of course, can have side effects. St. John's wort, we mentioned earlier, there's been repeated clinical trials that show that it's safe and effective for mild to moderate, not severe, but mild to moderate depression and anxiety, and the active compound is hypericin, so look for it on the label. Okay, and then we just mentioned cranberry. It's really a fruit, I guess, but people use it certain times of the year, like Thanksgiving. The bright red should give you a clue compared to what we talked last night. Blueberry, to a lesser degree, is effective, but cranberry has been used in treatment of UTI, or urinary tract infections. And elderly women who drank daily a cup of cranberry juice for 6 months were only 1/2 as likely to develop UTIs and were twice as likely to overcome present UTI infections. Now note, this is cranberry juice. This is not cranberry cocktail, which is mostly sugar and water. This is the straight juice. And people thought for a long time this was due to its acidity. It made the urinary tract acidic, and that prevented the E. coli bacteria from growing. But research was published a few years ago, and they showed very nicely, here you see the E. coli with these fimbriae, these appendages that kind of have hooks on them that enable them to inhabit the urinary tract infection, the lining. And with cranberry, these pigments, these anthocyanins, are like clay that fasten on to the end of the fimbriae. It's like Velcro. You know how Velcro works, and you put some clay in between and you can't get it to stick, right? Well, it's the same principle here. The hook can't catch onto the lining and colonize and proliferate and give you an infection because the pigment is interfering, is blocking. So that's the mechanism how cranberry works. Okay, so in summary, culinary spices and commonly used herbal products can have, some cases, significant therapeutic value, and I'd recommend that when you take a concentrated extract, such as cinnamon or turmeric, out of a bottle, and it's concentrated, that this be done with the knowledge or supervision of a healthcare practitioner, because whenever you take concentrated things rather than just eating the plant, the turmeric root versus the curcumin powder, there's a difference in terms of potency and in terms of effects. Just like with vitamin pills, you don't take 5 times the recommended daily allowance as a pill because it can have a side effect, whereas if you take it in the food, it's not going to have that effect. So some of you say, well, we can't grow spices, we don't have a garden. I would say to that, rubbish. You do have space. You see this picture? Wheelbarrows, pots, blocks next to your step. You can do you can even have a windowsill. You see the windowsill there? There are some that grow during the winter nicely, and so you can enjoy these culinary treats all year round, no problem. Okay? So in conclusion, I just show you, as we mentioned last night, there are books that I've written that are available at the ABC in town. If any of you want more information, these books were written not to make money, but to make available information, because as I've lectured around the world, people always come up and say, do you have any resources we can read further on this? And I got so sick and tired of hearing that, I decided, well, I better write something so I have something to give out. So anyway, these are available, and there's a book signing on Thursday the 28th. So at this time, I think we're going to try our Q&A again. I think we're going to do it with written questions this time for this old deaf dude.
Yes, just hand your questions forward, or to the aisle, shall I say. And thank you. We'll get those up to the front.
If you have information that you want to share with friends or family and you can't remember everything, we're not having a quiz, so you don't have to worry about remembering too much. But if you are, I'm told that these programs have been taped and will be available on YouTube or some format. Okay, the question here is, are concentrated juices a good form of sweetener? We can answer that by going a number of different directions. The concentrated juices are, of course, very rich in sugar. They are what we might call natural sugar, and they may have, they will have some vitamins and minerals associated with the fruit from which they came, so they are better than just a water solution of sugar or sucrose. But still keep in mind, it's still a large amount of sugar that you're getting. And in the lab, we've shocked students when we get them to test the amount of sugar in an orange soda versus orange juice, to find that they aren't a whole lot different in sugar. Now that doesn't mean that one isn't, that they're both considered the same level of healthiness. No, the orange juice is definitely better. But if you're trying to cut down on absolute amount of sugar ingested, then drinking lots of fruit juices is not the way to do it. But certainly it does have other nutrients. And the next question here is, how does blending affect fiber? Blending, it is like 1,000 blades all working, cutting furiously the fiber in little pieces and macerating it to even finer than pulp if it's blended at a high speed. So what it does, because it doesn't disrupt the molecule of fiber, fiber is a polymer, like nylon, like a polyester shirt. Okay, it's many, many units put together. So blending smashes all these down into individual units or building blocks that may be 2 or 3 or 4 units together. So it's much more easily absorbed, much more easily digested by the bacteria in our gut, the microflora in the colon. So blending doesn't have any effect on the vitamins and minerals. All it does is it means it's much more quickly absorbed. And as we mentioned last night, I think this was asked last night, for people who want quick energy, a smoothie's a good idea. But if you want to have to wait 5 hours till the next meal and you don't want to be having to stop at the store all along the way in your trip buying some more energy, then eating the whole food is going to give you a more sustained energy than using the juice. Please name a few examples of a good breakfast and a few examples of a good lunch. Okay, that's a bit tough. Well, maybe I should tell you what I do. This is not by any means the gold standard, but habit, culture, whatever. But my wife makes a beautiful homemade granola from oatmeal with seeds, flax seeds and nuts and so forth. We use raisins on it, unsweetened raisins, banana, peach, cherry, grape, whatever. All of the above if they're available. I exasperate my wife because I eat up the fruit before the week is over. I grew up in Australia where Dad used to always buy a lug of fruit from the grocery store, and it was Thursday, and I hated Wednesday. You know why? Because the food would always run out Monday and Tuesday, and we have to weather through Wednesday before the next lot came in. So yeah, toast with tahini, unsweetened jam, and I'm not against using sugar, but Apple Valley has a terrific organic fruit-only raspberry jam. I'm very partial to raspberries, but you can do anything you like, and then a glass of soya milk, unsweetened soya milk. One piece of toast if I'm really hungry or planning to do work in the garden, maybe 2 slices. So you can do all sorts of variations. You'll notice there's no protein-rich food like sausage or tofu or anything like that. We eat that at the next meal with vegetables. So the lunch is just a gorgeous plate of phytochemicals. Yellow corn, red tomato, green broccoli, some quinoa, which I dearly love, garbanzos or red kidney beans, I don't know, green peas, just enjoy that. Always with some whole wheat toast, whole wheat sourdough from the local bakery in town. It's owned by Cliff Sorensen's granddaughter, so it makes it special. I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm only a little guy, so I don't eat 3,000 calories. Some of you may need more than that, but can we simply increase herbs in food with the guidelines for buying herbs? It seems you may have been suggesting supplementation only. No, I'm not suggesting supplementation. I include that in my lectures because I know that's where a lot of people go. What I talk about is not a recommendation for anything. It's presenting information, and the person who chooses what to do with it is you. You know, you have to choose from the information. And I certainly am not pushing supplements. Mostly, I will recommend some, since I'm a total vegetarian, and this is another lecture that I can't give now, but B12 is a huge issue, and B12 doesn't occur in plant foods, but it occurs in fortified plant foods. So when you take your soya milk or your soya yogurt or whatever, you read the label and make sure it has B12 added. If it doesn't, you move on to the shelf to the next one, because it's important to have that daily, because it has neurological effects and they can be irreversible, and I could go on, but it's important. Just as a security that we're getting enough B12, I recommend taking a tablet twice a week. Yes? Is
it animal derived?
What's that?
Animal derived B12?
Is it animal derived?
No. No, it's made from microorganisms which are not animals. So, I'm sorry?
Blue-green algae, she said.
Yeah. Okay, the other vitamin that I would recommend is vitamin D, 1,000 international units. Why is that? Because I've talked to a lot of physicians, and back at Andrews, it was a very common thing that vitamin D level of most adults living in the northern half of the United States are marginal or vitamin D deficient because we're not getting enough sunlight. We don't want to get too much because of skin cancer, but most of us aren't outdoors to get the vitamin D exposure. And vitamin D is not just for healthy bones, and women who are aging, of course, are highly interested in that. It's involved with there are vitamin D receptors all over the body, the liver, the heart, the colon. Vitamin D is required in many places, so it just makes good sense that we live high latitude, above 25 degrees. We're up at, what, 42 or something? We're way up there. And we don't make the vitamin D, and especially during the winter. Late fall through middle of spring, there's no vitamin D being made, hardly at all, if at all. And the data shows it very clearly. So taking a vitamin D is very important. I'm sorry, we wandered away there.
That's all right.
So I'm not recommending supplements, even the herbal supplement. Some people go that direction because they want to get something quick. Okay, I think this was a whole lecture's worth, wasn't it?
They got their money's worth.
What are the benefits of seeds? Okay, another terrific question, but we don't have 2 hours. I don't want to promote my books, but there are many chapters in there about the seeds. The seeds are good sources of protein, vitamins, iron, minerals, and oftentimes healthy fats. Think of seeds as the close cousins of nuts. Those of you here last night, you saw the benefits of nuts. Nuts are fabulous. Okay, so the seeds are the right-hand lady or the right-hand man or the close cousin of nuts. So flax seed, sesame seed, sunflower seed, pumpkin seed, these are all good, healthy, and some of them, like pumpkin seed, actually helps protect against prostate cancer. Okay. There's a question here. Do we want to?
Not a question, but a comment.
Yeah.
Sage only blooms every 7 years.
Sage only blooms every 7 years.
Is that all varieties? Because our sage bloomed every year, didn't it? In Michigan.
That's what I was told.
I don't know. You've stumped me. It may be true. I'm not denying it, but it sounds odd to me. But it could be. You know, there's many. Salvia is the Latin genus, and there's many different salvias. So I don't know if it's true of some or all of them, but I'll look into it. Is curry bad for you? Well, that's like asking me if wearing a red shirt's not good, because it's a good question, but it's very nebulous for me, because curry can be one of 10,000 different products. Every Indian village that exists has its own unique curry, and they won't tell the neighbouring village what the ingredients are. It's secret. Only they know. So I would have to look at what is the curry that you're referring to. Curry often has pepper in it. They don't always, but they often do, and so that would make it questionable or marginal as far as I'm concerned. You may judge otherwise based on what I presented, but the curry often has a lot of good compounds like turmeric and cumin and those sort of things, so it's kind of a mixed bag. It's got a lot of good stuff, but it may have one ingredient that's not so good, but you would have to judge for yourself on that. Can garlic be used by a person who has a sulfur allergy? I would think not, because all of the compounds in garlic that provide great activity, every one of them, as far as I know, has sulfur involved. So, sorry, I'd say. What kind of B12 is best? Whew. This is somewhat controversial. Some people say that methylcobalamin, which is the form in the blood, is the best, and you should take that, whereas the form that's most commonly sold is cyanocobalamin. the data that I've looked at shows that there's not a whole lot of difference, and there has been a difference in price. The methyl form was more expensive, but whatever is available on the shelf, I would say use it with discretion, because it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Rather than the kind, it's the amount and the frequency that you take. You know, you should be taking 250 or 500 micrograms, not milligrams, micrograms, 2 or 3 times a week for a good insurance coverage. Boy, a lot of questions.
We're almost done. 3 more.
Do you need to take magnesium to make vitamin D work? No, because you have magnesium in all the vegetables and fruits that you eat, and other foods like whole grains have magnesium. If you want to take magnesium for heart reasons, rhythm or so forth, 250 milligrams a day is not exorbitant. The recommendation is a little more than that, but if you think your diet's a little deficient. But no, vitamin D usually requires calcium rather than magnesium, but magnesium is still important. How long do herbs last? A very good question. I'm sorry I omitted this vital information. It depends on how you cook. There are some people who, when they use these bottles, of course, herbs, when you say herbs, if you, or the Americans say herbs, don't they? I'm sorry. I'm here all this time I've been saying herbs, and you're probably wondering, what's he talking about? If you're talking about the ones that grow at the back door, you know how long they last. You just pick enough for what you want to do with them, so they're not sitting around. And some are annual and die off, some are perennial and so forth. But if you're talking about the ones in the bottle, depends on how you cook. If you take the lid off and leave the lid down and then go on doing things, as some cooks do, you know, maybe half an hour later the lid goes back on. Well, that's allow the volatile compounds to... Now, not all of them have this escape mechanism. Some of them have compounds that are good that don't go, but let's just make a general statement. And that my recommendation is that after 6 months, certainly 12 months, whatever's left in the bottle should go into the trash can, because the potency of it is diminished substantially. Okay, so don't buy huge bulk material, unless it's things like ginger. Ginger can last a lot longer, but things like sage and all Italian seasoning and basil and the things that are crushed up leaves that come, they're going to lose their potency by taking the lid off and on, off and on. Well, again, it depends on how often you use it. If you don't take the lid off but once a month, well, maybe they'll last 12 months. Okay? And do they expire? Well, yes, after a year, I'd say. Can B12 be taken orally? Well, certainly, yes. That's how most people take it. I thought it was destroyed in the GI gut, no, and needed to be dissolved in the mouth. Being dissolved in the mouth makes it absorbed in the mouth directly into the bloodstream, whereas when it goes into the gut, it often has to be combined with a protein down there. So the ones that you dissolve for 10 minutes under your tongue are not highly recommended, but they're good. Studies have shown that versus taking it the normal method, there's no difference in absorption with one provision, and that is chew your tablet. Study done in Weimar 20 years ago in California. You know Weimar Institute? Because they feed a plant-based diet to the students. They checked their B12. Low. They gave them B12. I forget, 6, 8, 10 weeks later, checked the B12. What's going on? And the professor there, Dr. Milton Crane, who was involved at that time, he told me his experiment verbally. He said then he asked all the students to chew the pill, and then after some weeks tested again, and guess what? The B12 was up in the normal range instead of being down in the deficiency range. A lot of tablets. You heard of frequent flyers? You know what they are? The airlines offer them, okay? Free passage. Well, a lot of pills do the same thing. How do I know? Back at Andrews, we did an experiment with calcium in terms of dissolvability and absorption. And we went to the local market like Andy's, and we got gels and tablets and powders. We got all different types. And we put them in vinegar, which simulates the acidity of the stomach. And we had a little magnet whirl around in the solution. And after 45 minutes, we measured how much was left, which would give us an idea of, because for nutritionists, absorption depends on dissolvability. If something doesn't dissolve, it's not going to be absorbed. So guess what we discovered? The calcium tablets, after 45 minutes, they looked like nothing had happened. The powder was all gone, it all dissolved in. Well, that's one thing, but then we had this gentleman, he's in his mid-40s, he's going back to school to get a degree. He came to my office afterwards and he said, "Hey Doc, this really touched me today because I have a personal experience." I said, "Well, what was it?" Well, he said, "Last weekend I cleaned out my brother-in-law's septic and we got 2 buckets of pills, calcium pills." I said, "Really?" He said, "Now I know where they came from." I said, "Yeah, well, just spread the word that if you're going to take a calcium pill, chew it. Okay, don't just swallow it because it'll fly on United with a free ticket. Come out the other end and nothing has happened." So yes, B12, vital. Chew it or put it under the tongue and let it dissolve.
So we have one final question. We thank you so much. And this will be our last question for today.
Okay. I have a friend who has eaten and lived a very healthy lifestyle to prevent breast cancer, which runs in women of her family. She has now come down with a very aggressive form of breast cancer. She's feeling quite disillusioned. Well, I'm sorry to hear this about your friend. Cancer is a nasty word. I don't know if you were here last night, but I started off addressing this issue. Remember, I said that vegans get colon cancer, vegetarians get heart disease, people who sleep 8 hours and drink 2 litres of water every day get diabetes. Living a healthy lifestyle is not a 100% or 110% guarantee that nothing's going to happen bad to us. We live on this in this earth where the air is contaminated, the water is contaminated, not poison, but in different places. Our food is sometimes with pesticides. I mean, there's trouble everywhere. And also, she gives the key here in saying that breast cancer does what? Runs in the family. So she has the genetic battle to fight, which is very difficult. Every one of us is genetically programmed to die of something. And the when we live healthfully, we put off that final day into the future. If we don't, then it's going to happen sooner. If she hadn't have been living a good lifestyle, she'd be dead, perhaps. That's kind of crude and rough to say, but it's very understandable that she's disillusioned, because it's frustrating when you do all the things that are right and yet still you get cut down by the satanic knife of death or whatever. So we shouldn't think that we've done wrong or that we've done sinfully. We've done our best, and I'm sure she's done her best. So that's my comments. I'm sorry. We will not relent on following a healthy lifestyle because we feel better. There's no question about it. When you eat properly and exercise and get sleep and do all those things we've talked about, maintain our mental health like we talked about this morning, we feel better, and we can bring glory to God in our daily lives and share His love more effectively. So we shouldn't punish ourselves, but something strikes us down before we think it should. I don't know. It kind of leaves you speechless in some ways, because it's heartbreaking to see a family member upset because they've done all the right things.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know about you all, but I've learned a lot. I've been greatly blessed. We appreciate Dr. Craig's visit so much. Let's have prayer. Lord God, we are just astounded every time we think of your creation. As Dr. Craig said, whether we look at the very big or the very small, it's perfect and it's beautiful. And you've created so many phytochemicals that are good for us and that help to heal us. So Lord, for each person in this room, I pray that as we consider our own health, that you would lead us and guide us in the path we should go and show us what herbs we should use and what we should do for our own health, and that we would reach out to those around us and help them in a loving way as well. And we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.